What if you could add another country to your itinerary with zero costs and potentially even lower your costs? What if you could do the most iconic trip in that country in just one day? On today's episode, we tackle a dirty word in travel, the dreaded layover. If this word strikes fear into your heart, stick around to find out how a layover can become the highlight of your trip.
Welcome to the Travel More podcast.
Each episode, we share custom itineraries, travel hacks, expert advice, and even stories of our past travel failures to help you level up your travel game.
I'm Shelly, a lover of plans, itineraries, and cheap flights. I'm an expert deal finder with one eye always on the budget.
And I'm Bruce, the improviser, ready to pick up where plans fail to turn letdowns into unexpected trip favorites. We're here to bust through barriers that stop you from making your travel dreams a reality.
So book that flight, buy the tickets, and say hello to your next adventure.
This is the Travel More podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Travel More podcast.
Welcome back.
It's a little gloomy here in, well, not usually sunny Connecticut, I was going to say, but...
Where the weather's ever changing in New England?
Yeah, it's a little...
I wish it was
dreary.
snow, but it's rain.
Yeah, it is cold rain though, so literally the worst of both worlds.
Yes.
But we were excited today because we're starting to look at our spring break travel plans.
Yeah, well, we have a big trip coming up,
summer.
and we're thinking about. We actually just started talking about summer today because it may seem like it's far away, but we're talking
6
months, and now is really the time to get going and thinking about what you might be doing in the summer.
Yeah, so if you haven't already checked out our very first episode on the Travel Talk, where we kind of go over our methodology for, planning our trips for the whole year, now might be the time to do that, or at least after this episode, head back over there and get your own Travel Talk going. Since we are kind of in the beginning of the year, it's the right time to do it. Don't want you to miss out on this year of travel just because you haven't had it planned, set up.
Yeah, now is the time to start.
But with all that being said, let's kind of jump in. We do have a lot to talk about today, so I don't want to spend too much time yapping back and forth. Yeah. So we're going to talk today about layovers.
Ooh,
yeah.
So why would you want to talk about that?
So, this whole thing started back in 2017. It was actually our very first international trip together. I was looking at plane tickets. I had never done anything international except I had gone to Canada.
Well, this was your first cross-Atlantic trip.
Yes. And actually only my second ever international at all. And we drove into Canada. So this is my first international flight.
And we were definitely budget conscious at this time too.
Yes, extremely budget conscious. I was just graduating grad school and we were on one income. So, and that income was a, starting kind of salary.
Entry level.
Entry level, yeah.
Shelly was in school. And, I remember thinking, wow, getting to Europe, the cost of the plane ticket is the biggest issue. And it's going to be at least like $1,000 for each of us or something like that.
Yeah. And we knew that we could keep costs low once we got there. We had a friend living there on a Fulbright scholarship.
Right.
So we knew, okay, we just need to get there.
Once we get there, then accommodations, all of that, we could probably do cheaper.
Yeah. And we at that time, Airbnb was at the height. So we knew we could split it. So really, we were just looking at.
How do you get there?
Yeah. How do you get there and cheaply?
Yes.
And so I was looking at these plane tickets and we had signed up for a Capital One card. So we had some travel credits.
That was our first entry, I guess the entry level travel hacking, right?
Yeah. This is like baby travel planners.
Yeah. Travel infancy.
Yeah. So we had about $500 a piece in free travel credit.
And that was just from using our cards throughout the year.
Yeah, and also the intro bonuses, which I don't mean to keep talking about episodes we've already
If you want to hear more about that, go back to our second episode where we talk about this.
Yeah, really just go back and listen to all the episodes is what we're trying to say. But anyways, we had about $500, so we're like, okay, well, if there are 1,000, that's just 500. So I got to looking, and about January, I would say, I found a ticket that was $550, and my heart leapt out of my body. I was so excited. I was like, this is a free trip essentially to Germany because we have that $500. I need to book this right this second. I was on my lunch break. And I literally was texting Bruce and I was like, we have to do this right now. Yeah, we just said
do it. Go for it.
Yeah. And I know we have that 24 hours cancellation. Everyone has 24 hours cancellation.
So it was like, all right, this seems too good to be true. Let's go.
Yeah. So I booked it.
But then later.
And then I started looking actually at the flight. And there was, I didn't get in until 2 days later.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I just ruined this trip. We're going to miss a whole day of Germany. Like, I was so upset. And
right, because we only had so many weeks for our vacation.
it was a good amount of time.
It was good.
It was
but
2 weeks.
When you take 4 days out of that, when you think about it, which is what it seemed like.
It did seem like that.
Because I think when you look at these itineraries, you think, oh, 6 a.m. we're arriving in Frankfurt or wherever, Munich, wherever we're flying in.
Yeah, because it's 2 days later.
Except it's 2 days later. And you forget to think about all the time changes. So anyway.
Yeah, so I, of course, was devastated and was like, oh my gosh, should we cancel this ticket? Because I don't want to lose all this time. And then when I actually really looked at the details of this ticket, it was like, oh, wait a minute. We have 18 hours in Iceland. And my original thought was, what am I going to do in an airport for 18 hours?
Yeah.
And then we're like, wait a minute. We can leave the airport. Like, I know that sounds like obviously, but I mean, as baby travelers, we were kind of like, it's a foreign concept. It's such a big deal to get to an airport and check in and do all these things that it's like, I'm not going to leave the airport
You're thinking,
once I'm there.
why would you go through that again? It's not where I'm intending to go.
Yeah,
Our
exactly.
ultimate destination was Munich and to meet up with our friend who was there.
Yes, it was not to leave the airport in Iceland. But then, I started thinking like 18 hours, that's way more than enough time to leave an airport, drive a good distance, do whatever you want, come back, go through all of your checks again. Of course, we don't have our checked bags, so it's an easier security line. You just go straight through security. So I was like, I think we should just leave the airport. And of course, Bruce was like, yeah,
yes,
we should.
This story comes from where some of our listeners might be at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe you've not gone on a bigger trip. You're thinking you want to do this. And, once we figure this out, it's opened up the door to other ideas of layovers. But,
oh, yes.
But this one in particular, it's actually by design with Iceland Air.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once we talked to some people who had done this before, they let us in on that little known secret. That.
Yeah, there are definitely a few airports, two that come to mind, Iceland Air, Qatar Airways. Those are literally set up like for layovers. It's
And
a tourism kind of
yes.
boost.
They want, Iceland has been doing this for years where it's an easy hopper over to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So they make the flights have always been cheaper and they want you to get into Reykjavik and go into their country.
Yeah, so
Same thing
not
with
only are they making their flights cheaper because the tourism board essentially owns the airline. So they're purposefully putting these long layovers in this area at opportune times. These are not overnight layovers.
Mm-mm.
These are like...
We got in right in the morning.
Yeah, right. We literally landed, I remember, at 6 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
We picked up our rental car and our flight out was at 1 a.m. So while it was a very long day, it was a day. It was not
Right.
overnight, so we didn't have to figure out hotels or anything like that.
And you've got the excitement of the beginning of your trip to push you along.
Exactly. You're still in the I'm excited, I'm going on vacation mode. So these airlines, they set up these longer layovers in these cities. And not only do they set them up and make them cheaper, but they also are set up where they have tours and buses and things that will take you to the city center and pick you back up and bring you to the airport. Not all airports will do that. So for example, if you were going to fly in to Charles de Gaulle in France, you would have to take the subway, which still may be a good idea. So don't out that just because of this, but you would need to find your own transportation to the city center and back and make sure you have enough time. Where these
Right.
other airports like Qatar and Iceland, they have specific buses and things that take you to and from the airport because they want you to leave the airport and explore the city.
So really, when we think about layovers and turning them from something dreaded to something desired, there's levels, right? So some of these itineraries are built in by design. They're easier. They're less energy, less time, and they save you money. And that would be like going to Iceland and spending the day there before you get to your final destination, or maybe you're stopping in Qatar on a much further journey.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are some other ways to actually look on how to add layovers into your trip. And like Shelly's saying, you may have to do some of that yourself.
Yeah.
But both could be really beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. There are different reasons why you would add these layovers and different kind of strategies into finding them. But why we would choose layovers. So if we were looking at an itinerary and we were like, maybe we should look into these longer layovers to add a stop. These are the reasons we would. First of all, we have time. So if we were only going to be in a destination for like this one coming up for a week and we have 3 days in each country, absolutely not.
Yeah,
we are not adding a layover there.
We want direct as fast as possible.
Yes.
Right?
So it definitely depends. Do you have 10 days? Do you have 2 weeks? Do you have more than 2 weeks? That's the kind of time I would start to think, I could leave a day, and be able to explore this other country, get a little taste of it at least. So first of all, you have the time. Second of all, there are no additional visa or COVID requirements. So obviously COVID is a new thing. We all have to think about it now. So it is worth noting, are the places you're going having extra precautions when it comes to COVID?
And requirements. And in some places, even beyond COVID, you may have vaccinations beyond that that you would need. That may not be worth getting if you're only there for a layover.
Yeah, so just to give it a quick example of that, we had a stopover in Rwanda. Ours was only about an hour long, but we could have added an extra day or something in Rwanda on our trip to Uganda. But that requires a separate visa. So we could have gotten that visa if we had known that that's what we were going to do. But it's just worth noting that you want to make sure that you know the requirements for each of those. Another reason that we would, really think about it is layover is not just overnight. So for example, a ticket I looked at about 6 months ago was from London to Portugal, and there was a stopover in London, but it was from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Right. So really,
That's not worth it.
It's not worth it. You're going to have to get some sleeping accommodation. It's just, it's a bad one. I would never pick that.
No. So that's literally just paying to be there because you're also going to have to buy a hotel room there. So it's like you're stopping over, it's annoying, and you're going to have to pay money because you have to sleep at some point. So it's worth it to look at the actual times you will be there. So that's kind of why we would decide to do layovers. And now we're going to start talking about what are some amazing successes we've had in these layovers.
And failures.
Yes. So, what actually could you expect to see, but also you can learn from our mistakes here and see what could happen.
So let's start with that first trip we were talking about, Iceland, back in 2017, that we thought it was a mistake and ended up being one of our favorite things we've ever done.
Yeah, it was amazing. So in the 18 hours that we had in Iceland, we did a Golden Circle tour. We self-guided our tour. So if you aren't familiar with Iceland, it's an amazing country, but they have a very popular kind of driving route called the Golden Circle. It's about 300 kilometers. So we are, I like to say expert road trippers. We drive a lot. So we were like 300 kilometers, no big deal.
Well, you got to remember that I met Shelly. She's from Memphis and it's 18 hours to Connecticut. So
we've done that drive, at least half a dozen times.
Many times.
Yeah. So we thought that's no problem for us. So we picked up the car. I think once we finally got in the car, probably around 7 a.m. and we started on our way. So there are, I think, about 4 or 5 stops in the Golden Circle tour.
There's some major ones, and then there's some other things you could probably add.
Yeah, of course. So
one of the first stops we went to, which I would recommend everyone does, is the Continental Divide. So it's a national park, and there's no entrance fee. So that's a big part of this. Iceland is very expensive.
So expensive.
I always like to think about it as the cost of, a burger and fries at whatever restaurant. I think
it was like $30.
Yeah, you're coming. Yeah, exactly. So
it was, obscenely expensive.
Your baseline meal is like moderate to expensive dining.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there aren't options out there that are affordable. And that's one of the best parts about this. These parks, there was no entrance fee.
Yeah.
So one of the first stops, if I pronounce this correctly, I'll get an award. I think it's Pingvellir National Park, but it's the Continental Divide. The next one is the Great Geyser.
Yeah, which was amazing.
Yes. So there's a lot of natural beauty in Iceland, and a lot of these stops highlight that.
Yeah, and Iceland is like a geothermal kind of capital, so they have lots and lots and lots of thermal kind of hot springs.
Right, like volcanic activity, really cool rock formations, geysers, all that kind of stuff. It really, when we landed in Iceland, it felt like we were on Mars.
Oh, literally. I kept saying that. I think I said that probably a dozen times while we were there. I was like, this just feels like we're on a different planet.
Right. So there's there's cultural things and there's natural wonder that's just awesome and unique to Iceland.
Yeah.
So the Great Geyser was that second stop. And a lot of these parks, they do have food, but I know the food there was pretty expensive. It's totally worth it just to see the geyser and then move on.
Yeah. There was a like a tourist kind of shop near the geyser, but it was like 25, 30, 35 maybe dollars for a plate of fish and chips. And we were kind of like, I mean, like we said, we were very budget conscious at this point. And we were like, no way can we afford that.
So our car did come with GPS,
Yeah.
and it wasn't very difficult at all to navigate this. It's very well marked, and it's a pretty obvious route. There's not many other routes you could take before going on a dirt road. So we actually found this really cool farm. It's called the Friedheimer Tomato Farm.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yes, and it's off the Golden Circle, very easy to get to, but it's not one of the main stops. It was awesome. We got some soup. It was tomato soup with fresh bread. The place was packed. People were coming out, and you don't have to sit. You could just get food to go, and it was totally worth it.
Yeah, we actually had to get food to go because the tables were full. And a thing, if you are not a European traveler, you should know, is that it's not like the United States. They don't really have you think in the United States, you take about an hour to eat. That's not really how it is in European countries. It's kind of an event. So they don't really give you a time to come back.
No one is pushing you at the tables.
Yeah.
It's generally how I would say most European countries, you sit, you don't get bothered until you're ready to leave.
Yeah, so they don't really do things like in the US where they're like, oh, it's about an hour wait. Like when we went to Iceland, we're like, well, how long is it? They were like, we don't know.
We're full.
Yeah, we're just full. You can sit and wait until someone leaves. So we did not do that. We just got something to eat to go, and we sat outside in their gardens, and it was awesome.
Really beautiful place. Greenhouses being heated by geothermal energy from the ground. Awesome stop.
Yeah.
So next up after that, we went to Gullfoss, which really awesome waterfall. I remember I showed someone a picture of this.
Oh, you're telling my story.
Oh, you can go ahead. Tell it. Is this your dad that we showed it?
I showed my dad a picture of this, and he was like, oh, that's very cool. What are those little dots? And I said, those are people. And he was like, oh my gosh. It really is amazing.
Our listeners will have to fact check us on this, but man, I think Gullfoss has got to be bigger than Niagara Falls. And if not, it's so majestic, but yeah, it's huge. And
the setting is wildly different than Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is like literally in the middle of a city. This is just in the middle of nowhere, it feels like.
It is definitely of myths and legends. You think of like awesome stories of Norse mythology, and these big landscapes come to mind. So it's awesome. Gullfoss is great. After that, we went to our fourth stop, which one was this, Shelley? I'm trying to remember now.
This was a crater stop. So again, there's lots of craters in Iceland. But to be fair, we got to this one. We were pretty tired. We've been up since 6 a.m. and we didn't really sleep on the plane. We got there and there was an entrance fee, and we kind of went, we get the point.
Yeah.
And we kind of just kept going.
I think it's one of those, I think you could hike up and see all these volcanic type craters.
Yeah. And we kind of were like, you know what? We're tired. We don't really want to pay the entrance fee. We're just going to keep going.
Right.
So we saw it, and we saw where it was, saw what it would probably be, and then kept going to our last stop.
Oh, one of the best stops.
Which was called the Secret Lagoon. So another thing, we kind of mentioned this already, but there are many, many hot springs in Iceland. Obviously, the most popular is going to be the Blue Lagoon.
It's really marketed. It's
very marketed.
It's part of that layover package, right?
Yeah.
So you can take a bus into Reykjavik and go to the Blue Lagoon, and it's all together, and you don't have to worry about it. So definitely,
which would be an amazing trip. Like, don't get me wrong.
I would totally do it in the next time to experience it. But when we were reading through reviews and sifting through stuff, we realized that was like, for lack of a better word, the tourist trap.
Yeah, and we just weren't. Again, we're very budget conscious. It's quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Think about $100 a person. We were already spending $100 on the rental car, and we just couldn't justify the costs. So we found this place called the Secret Lagoon. Clearly, if it's online, it's not really secret. But it was about a third of the price of the Blue Lagoon. It was just a nice local hot spring. It was clearly local.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a big part of the local culture, from what I gathered, is just it's kind of like having a gym membership.
Yeah. There was no frills. It was beautiful. But it was literally kind of just a geothermic pool. A great way to end.
Some snacks I think you can get.
Yeah, beer, I think.
Oh, but I don't think I had it. That's one thing I'll tell you. You cannot drive with any amount of alcohol. Even if you had like a 4% beer and you were hanging out, it's just not worth it. Just a side note, in Iceland, they have very strict rules around that. So I think Shelley may have had one. And then I waited till we got back to the airport.
Yeah, so, it was nice to kind of just hang out, have that nice hot spring, relax.
Really refreshing before the flight.
I was going to say after that long day.
So Secret Lagoon, definitely recommend it. And then I think that was our last stop, right?
That was our last stop.
And we made it back to the airport around 11 p.m.,
yep.
which felt like it was noon because it was
of the
June,
midnight sun, which is also a cool
essentially
phenomenon.
the Arctic. So the sun was up. You know, I think a big part of traveling in the summer and doing these long hours, it's easier because the sun is out.
Yes.
So I remember we were at the bar, got a couple Icelandic beers around. It was almost midnight. The sun is still up, and we got on our flight around 1 a.m.
Yep. So that was our not probably, at this point, that is our number one success story in terms of layovers. For now, let's talk about our fail of layover.
Two, I think, well, one in particular.
One in particular.
And it's Munich.
Oh, really? I was about to talk about Qatar.
Oh, see, this is what I said too. Well, I'll tell you. Let's start with Munich.
Well, clearly we have more than one. Munich. Okay, so Munich actually wasn't really a layover. It was that we had to get to the airport for our flight at 5 a.m., but our accommodation ended the day before. Our original plan was, and clearly we would not make this plan now because there's no way we could do this, but our original plan was, we'll just party all night in Munich and then head around 3 a.m. to the airport, get on the flight at 5 and then be on our way. But about...
Well, what we did was we booked the flight with a certain departure in mind because we thought the airport had sleeping pods, which you could only access if you're already in the airport as a layover.
Yeah.
So we got to the airport, I don't know, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night.
Well, because our original plan was to party all night and then go. And then we quickly realized we just cannot do that after 2 weeks of European travel.
Well, and we hit up a bunch of breweries in Munich, and I think
and also we had been to like 5 countries. Like it just was a crazy trip.
It was a big tour. This was the same trip for Iceland. And
yes,
we got to the airport and realized that it was closed to us until a few hours before our departure. So
the whole airport was closed. There was like not a soul.
You can't enter it. At least the entrance into it.
Right. There's no security.
Nope.
Like, I mean, it was just closed. Not like there's no one there. There was no people there's nobody. There was a phone you could pick up and call. Thankfully, Bruce is fairly proficient in German and could kind of figure out that we're not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Because there are no flights at that time, so they don't staff the airport. So that was a fail.
We had to drop some money on the hotel that night, but it's okay. So to avoid that, definitely call us and we'll help you look up these things ahead of time.
But our layover fail, like our true layover fail, was with Qatar actually this last summer. So our plan was to do the same thing we did in Iceland. We had an 8-hour layover. And they say if you have more than a 4-hour layover, you can pretty easily get in and out of the airport to go on these different tours. So we booked a tour. We were really excited. It was like a night tour of Doha. And we were pumped. And then Bruce got COVID. And he got COVID like a couple weeks before we went to Africa. So we were totally in the clear to travel and everything was good. He was testing negative on like an antibody test, like the ones you have at home. But Qatar, to get in, required a PCR test. And if you're familiar, which I'm sure everyone is now, of COVID tests, PCR tests can show positive for like 3 months.
Right.
And we were worried if he took a PCR test and it was positive that it might mess up our African trip, even though, you know, he had been testing negative and it had been way past the quarantine dates. And, you know, everything was in the clear.
Right. And like there was no need for entrance testing from Uganda. And there was no testing prior from leaving the US because both countries had reached a certain level of whatever, vaccination, rules. But Qatar had ever-changing rules and they were more strict.
Yes. So literally at the last minute, we decided that it was not worth risking any kind of weirdness with him testing positive on a PCR.
It was too late to really get a different flight itinerary. So we ended up having to spend the 8 hours in the air, which Doha, it was not the worst thing in the world because it's a newer airport. And we were able to find a lounge to hang out in.
Yeah, so I guess...
But not what we wanted to do.
No. And honestly, even with lounge access, which really saved us, and that comes from our credit card, but even with the lounge access, 8 hours in an airport is a long time. So it was definitely, especially with the 30-hour travel to and from Africa, it was a lot. But, that's one of the things with travel is you just kind of got to roll with the punches, and sometimes things don't work out for you. But
you can plan as all you want. You've got to be ready to be flexible.
Yeah. And, part of that was kind of on us because we were traveling while the pandemic was still pretty active. I mean, it had been definitely waning, but it still was definitely a thing on people's minds. So we chose to travel during that time. And we chose to travel knowing the requirements in Qatar were different than Uganda. These are the things I mentioned in the beginning of this podcast to really consider.
Right.
So if you're a person who's like, no, that's not worth the risk, then I would just not book, layovers that have different requirements than your intended destination.
Again, this is an idea that I don't know many people are considering a layover as a positive aspect. And we're giving you some ideas of how it can really add something to your trip. Just like it did for our European adventure. We had no idea that we were going to add all of that Icelandic touring to it.
And honestly, I love Germany. We went to Vienna, Prague, Budapest. We did a lot of really cool countries, but Iceland is on the top of my list to go back. So it really became a highlight of that trip. Not just that was cool, but truly wow, we really have to get back there. Which good job, Icelandair, because I'm pretty sure that was their intended market. All right, and our very last thing we're going to talk about today is what's next.
What's next?
Which, this is actually very easy to talk about because we have a flight coming up where, again, Munich, hopefully this time doesn't let us down, but we have a trip where we have a layover in Munich. Now, this was another one where originally I was like, oh, man, layover. It even gets me. So it's not like I look at it and I go, wow, a layover, so excited. So I looked at it and I was like, oh, we've done nonstop for so long now.
We've had going to Paris was nonstop. We've had some
all kinds. LA is nonstop. All of Orlando, Miami.
We're getting spoiled on it.
We are getting spoiled.
But I'll tell you, depending on where you go, sometimes you have to have connectors.
Yeah, right? Or even you pay astronomically.
Right.
So if we weren't going to pay $3,000 a trip or a ticket, which we will never do.
Never say never.
Well, yeah, I'd have to be in a lay flat seat for a $3,000 plane ticket. So unless we were going to do all that, we had to have a layover. And this one, the first one we saw was that London one we mentioned earlier, which was overnight. And I was like, no way, I can't even do that. So the other one we found, I actually think Bruce found this one, was a layover in Munich. And he was excited because he was like, oh, I can get a beer and breakfast on the way there. So, okay, that one's fine. And then on the way back, there was one that we landed around 5 p.m. We're going to land around 5 p.m. And then the flight the next day leaves around 1 p.m.
Right.
So it is overnight, which we mentioned not to do. But it's enough buffer on each side. It's not late at night and it's not an early flight. So you have a few hours before you go to bed and you have a few hours being awake before you have to go. And to top it off, it's New Year's Eve.
Yes.
So it'll be more than a couple hours before you go to bed that night.
And one of the things about this was a Scott's Cheap Flight find that helped guide our choice of destination, right? Yep. So going back to our first episode, thinking about not the destination, but planning out when you can travel and then letting opportunities arise. That's how we found the destination to Porto in Portugal.
Yep.
But really, then when we started to play around with this price is when I found the most optimal layover. Because at first it was kind of like, this is a waste of time. We know you can't just go direct to Porto with this price. But I'm really excited now that we've got a New Year's in Munich, and that was never a part of this trip.
Oh yeah. Who wouldn't be excited about a New Year's in Munich? It's not even for lack of a better word, a boring city like Munich. No, you might as well be going to London or Paris.
And it's nice to have some prior knowledge of it, because I know taking the train out of the airport into the city is really easy. With some of our travel hacking points, we got a hotel
for free.
That's for free, really close by. So it's going to be low stress.
Yes. Well, we hope.
But we'll see. You'll find out.
The good news is that you can actually check right now to see how that trip went. It is down in the show notes. There is an article all about how that layover went. So we will continue to try to find cool layovers. We'll update you if you find any really cool ones we just can't wait to share. There are also ways to add cheap layovers on purpose through points and miles, which we also are going to try to get into in the coming months. So stick around to see how we do that.
Happy hunts for those steals.
As always, you can find us all over the internet. One way is at travelmorepodcast.com. We're on Instagram at The Travel Mores or Reddit at /TravelMore.
And for exclusive insider tips, tricks, and deals, use the link in the show notes to become a member of the Travel More Travel Club.
We'll see you soon. Did you know that every time you book a Disney or Universal vacation, you're paying for a service that you may not even be using?
Really?
That's right. Travel agent costs are added to your Disney or Universal vacation, whether you use one or not.
So you're telling me that I'm paying for something even though I'm not getting the help?
You got it. So next time you want to book a theme park vacation, make your money work for you. By booking with Magic Pass Travel, you'll get our expertise and years of experience without paying any extra and while supporting a small business.
Check out our show notes to find our contact information.
Can't wait to help you plan your next adventure.